starting shortly around 6:35 to give people time to get settled and get connected. If you're just joining us now, we'll be starting in a few minutes. We'll start around 6:35. Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you here tonight on behalf of St. Joan of Arc Catholic Community and Bethlehem Lutheran Church, Twin Cities. Our collaborative mental health ministry is dedicated to providing education, resources, and support to individuals and families living with mental illness, as well as professionals working in the mental health field. I wish we could be together in person tonight, but I am so grateful we have the ability to gather live via Zoom. Before we begin, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. First, please take a moment to mute your microphone. We ask that it remain on mute during the entire presentation. Also, there will be a time for question and answers. So if you have any questions during the presentation, if you are familiar with Zoom, great, but look for the question and answer section down by the menu and type in your question there. There'll be time for Karen to answer those questions at the end of her presentation. And lastly, this session is being recorded and will be available on Mental Health Connect's YouTube channel for future reference. So before we begin, I'd like to start us off in prayer. So if you could take a moment to sit back and take a deep breath, get grounded in the moment, kind of shake off the day. And as you join us today, just know that you are surrounded virtually by the community that loves and supports you. Holy God, who created us for and from love, in this time of social distancing, hold us close in your arms. Comfort those who are afraid. Enliven those who are bored. Give courage to those who are distressed. And warm those who feel the cold touch of loneliness. Breathe in, with and through us, as we walk through uncertainty into a new future. We trust that you are with us now and await us there. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. That is a prayer from Reverend Dr. Clark King on isolation. So tonight we're excited to have Karen Casey with us tonight as we launch our Hope for the Journey series. Karen is a best-selling author, educator, and speaker. She earned her PhD at the University of Minnesota and taught there for many years. And also, just to plug, she was a member of St. Joan of Arc back in the Harvey Egan days. So we welcome you back, even if you're in Florida right now. Karen has also written over 30 books on addiction, codependency, and recovery. Her first book, Each Day is a New Beginning, has sold more than 3 million copies. So when I first met Karen over a year ago at the Addiction and Faith Conference, I was struck by her humor and wit and her ability to address really hard topics with compassion, grace, and wisdom. And so we want to thank Karen for joining us tonight and inspiring us to be our better selves. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Well, hello, everybody. I can't see any of you, so I'm assuming that you can see me. So it feels like I'm talking just to Sherry. So maybe that's just as well. I don't know where the rest of you are, but you're probably sitting in your study or your living room or your porch or wherever you might be. As Sherry said, I am here in Naples, Florida. Normally, my husband and I spend summer months in Minneapolis, and because of COVID, we couldn't make the trip this year because I have been diagnosed with a lung disease, and the doctors recommended that I not travel, that I was too vulnerable to travel. So here we are, and so in 30 years, we've been down here for 30 years of winters, and so this is the first time we have spent the entire year, and whatever they tell you about how hot it is in the summer, they didn't exaggerate it. It is every bit that hot or hotter. And in this last week, we have had 22 inches of rain. So that lets you know that this is the tropics, that is for sure. but I am delighted that Sherry invited me to participate here tonight. And I remember well meeting her at the Addiction and Faith Conference that was held in Bloomington. And when I was at that conference, I did a keynote and kind of gave an overview of my whole life. And then I did a smaller workshop afternoon presentation on codependency. And so I'll make a point of talking about some of those points again tonight, I'm sure, because when I look at my whole life, and particularly in the context of mental health, I know that my struggle with alcohol and alcoholism began at a very young age. So I want to just give you a little background about why in the heck I'm here. Like, who is she and what does she have to tell us? Well, I am, as we always introduce ourselves when we're at a 12-step AA meeting, my name is Karen and I'm an alcoholic. And I have been in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous since May of 1976. So I've been on this journey for a really long time, but actually my journey with alcohol began when I was 13. And it really was because of a troubled home environment, a troubled inner being. I lived with constant anxiety and fear, and probably for everybody who ends up with the problem of alcohol, something triggers that first drink. And you realize, like, oh my God, this is the answer. And that's what happened for me at age 13. I poured whiskey in a glass of Coke at a wedding reception. And I thought, holy moly, this is it. I don't have to feel that constant anxiety anymore. And so, that's kind of followed me along for many years before I ever found myself at a place where I was in search of the kind of help that I really needed. But, I look at life as I don't believe that we ever make any actual wrong turns, that our lives are very, very intentional. And so I really look at all of the journey that I made from that family that I grew up in, that first drink at age 13, the unhealthy relationships, the marriage to an alcoholic man, a really crazy alcoholic marriage. I look at all that as absolutely perfect for who I was meant eventually to become. And that sometimes is hard for people to understand when you realize that you, in the process, have gone through a lot of struggle. I had some serious mental health issues in my own life. I mean, as a child, I used to think about suicide. I used to think of that as an option. I'm not sure why, as a child, I didn't really attempt it. And it always just, every time I read or hear or see on television about some child at age 12 or 13 or 14 that does commit suicide, it just breaks my heart because I know how they felt, because I know how I felt. And but later on my own journey, I did have very specific plans to commit suicide, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But at any rate, in my own life, in my own struggle, I didn't recognize at the time that part of my disease was codependency, but it was. Alcoholism and codependency are a deadly double disease, dual disease. And because of my codependency on others to tell me that I'm okay, what the codependent does, is, well, a number of things, but what I was always doing was looking at somebody else to get the assurance from them that I was okay. And because you can't spend your whole life doing that, then alcohol becomes even more attractive to you. So, of course, I kept making really bad decisions. And my codependency was primarily always around choosing a partner, choosing a relationship. And of course, that meant I was constantly making the wrong choices because I was choosing, we always choose people kind of as unhealthy or as healthy as we are. And at that period of my life, I was such an unhealthy person that I was really choosing very unhealthy people. And that certainly was the case with my first husband. I chose him, it shouldn't surprise you. I chose him because he loved to drink. You know, an alcoholic wants to choose a partner who wants to drink as much as they want to drink. And so he seemed like the perfect choice. It never really crossed my mind to ask Karen, do you really love him? I had gone to college, to Purdue University as an undergraduate. I went not because I really cared that much about getting an education at that time. I went because it was just kind of what everybody did. And somehow I knew that that was expected of me because my older sisters had gone. And because that's at that period of time, that's where you went to get a husband. You know, I graduated from high school in 57. So it was just kind of the natural thing. You know, you go off to college and maybe you'll get a degree, but hopefully you'll at least get a husband. And that was the mindset. I mean, what a sad mindset that was, but that was really what the 50s were like when I look back on them. And so I found him, and I found him in a geology class, and a whole lot of other women found him too. But we were all so impressed with him because he was the smartest person in the lab that we had to take. And there was a whole string of us that kind of followed him around. But I was the one that nabbed him. And lo and behold, he had a red Buick convertible. So I figured, you know, what could possibly go wrong with this relationship? So we married. We married while we were still at Purdue University. What went wrong was that we were absolutely wrong for each other because we were two crazy alcoholics. But let me back up a moment, because when I said we were wrong for each other, we were right for each other when I look at the bigger picture of where my life was actually going. And I want to make a point of that, of saying, you know, we really always, we have a destination. God, we are in concert with God through our entire life. I believe that to the tips of my toes. And so even though he was appeared to many, I think, and me at times too, like, what was I thinking? Why would I ever have chosen to be married to this person? Well, I married him because he asked me, and I figured maybe nobody else would. And after all, remember, I was in college, and one of the goals was to get married. And but you know, I look at that 12-year pretty crazy marriage as absolutely educational. You know, I think that every aspect of our lives, that every experience of our lives is very much a stepping stone to whatever is going to come next. And it's a very educational experience always. So at any rate, we spent 12 years. We ended up moving to Minnesota. I got a degree in education, taught school in Indiana. In fact, taught in my former elementary school which was pretty mind-blowing. And what was even more mind-blowing is that the principal in that elementary school was indeed the same principal when I had gone to school there. And my husband, Bill, he got a master's at Purdue and then wanted to get a PhD. So we ended up moving to Minneapolis so that he could go to the University of Minnesota to get a PhD. So that was my introduction to Minnesota. And I came to Minnesota, came to Minneapolis, loved it, got a job in St. Paul. But what was still so painful was the fact that I was in a marriage with somebody who was alcoholic, who was unfaithful, who was all the things that no woman, no marriage partner wants to have to put up with. But again, I look at all of that as very key ingredients to the journey that I was on, because they really led me deeper and deeper and deeper into my own alcoholism and into my own codependence. Well, after 12 years of his unfaithfulness, he ended up saying that he wanted to go off with another woman. By that time, I had decided, and I had decided, and I don't even know where the idea came from, but I think I felt so hopeless with what was happening in my life that I decided maybe I should go to graduate school too. I would never have, I never had that plan on my radar. So I kind of look at that trauma of the ending of that marriage, opening a door that I never, ever had intended to walk through. And in fact, when I tried to walk through it initially, the University of Minnesota said, thanks, but no thanks. Your undergraduate grades are not quite good enough. If you really want to come to graduate school, you better take some courses and prove to us that you're able to do it. So I thought, well, I guess that's my answer. I guess I'll do it. And so I took a bunch of classes and reapplied. And we have a saying in AA, God is doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And I felt from the get-go that God was doing for me what I don't think I could have done for myself, because I got straight A's on all of those classes and reapplied and started my graduate program. Bill was out of my life. I was on a whole new path, but the part of my path that hadn't changed at all was the fact that my mental condition had not really changed. You know, I was still constantly anxious, constantly searching for somebody to be in my life, giving me an indication that I was okay. I was constantly looking for that perfect partner. How I actually found time to do all my coursework is kind of mystifies me. But you know, I also, and I've told friends this, I think that alcohol, I'm not so sure I would admit to this everywhere, but I think that alcohol gave me courage to try things that I don't think I would have tried otherwise. And you know, I think that those of us who become recovering alcoholics can probably all look at some time in our life before alcohol really dug the ditch deeper. We can look at alcohol and say, you know, there was something that I was getting out of it for a period of time. And I know for me, I was getting courage out of it for a period of time. So I sailed through graduate school. I got my master's with no intention of going on for a PhD at that point. But again, I was involved in a relationship that was totally unhealthy, but perfect, because this is what happened. He was moving to California. And guess what? He didn't ask me to go with him. I was like, what? He didn't ask me, so I said within earshot of him to my roommate, well, I passed the master's today. I had passed, you take a whole slew of exams and you take an oral with all these people. And I said, I passed the master's and they told me I had the okay to go on for a PhD. And I guess that's what I'll do, thinking that he would hear me and say, what? You're not going to go to California with me? No, not a word. That was exactly how I ended up that next week saying, okay, sign me up. I'm here for the PhD. And I when I say, I look at all of these experiences as truly God's invitations to me. For now, it's true that I had to take notice of them. I could have ignored those things. I could have gone anyway, but I needed somebody to say, I want you to be with me. And that was not forthcoming. So what did I do? I did the next best thing. I decided, I guess I'll go ahead and get a PhD. I mean, what a crazy reason. You probably never met anybody who ever decided to go get a PhD on such a lame excuse as that. But I think that God works through us in ways that we never ever expected, perhaps. And that's exactly how it happened. I went through the whole PhD program. I got a PhD in American Studies at the University of Minnesota. I ended up being a straight A student, much to my amazement. As an undergraduate, I was primarily a C plus, B minus student, which is why they made me take classes before I could actually enroll. And again, I have always looked at that as God really being present in my life, God doing for me what I could not have done for myself. That somehow I was able to just focus with that help and do what I needed to do. Now, what happened, though, was that the relationship issues that I continued to have is what really took me on to another journey, a journey that I really had not, I didn't have any idea was going to happen. I ended up being in first one bad relationship after another. Guess what? They were all alcoholic relationships. That's typical for an alcoholic woman to choose an alcoholic partner. And that's exactly what I kept doing. And it was suggesting one of the people that I got involved with, he ended up in treatment. And it was suggested by his counselor that I go to Al-Anon, a program I had never heard of before. Talk about learning how to really be your better self. I walked into that first Al-Anon meeting and there was a whole room full of people who were being their better selves. A room full of people who were men and women who were so loving and so kind and so welcoming. And I had no idea if this is a program for me. All I knew is that what they had, I wanted more of, because what I knew is that I had never in my life, from childhood on, felt the sense of well-being that I felt when I walked into that room. It was better than any glass of Jack Daniels I had ever had. And that had been my drink of choice for so many years. I felt when I walked in there similar to how I felt at age 13 when I took that first drink, because my life had been nothing but anxiety, fear, remorse, all of these things that trouble so many people that end up then making wrong choices. And I was a master at making wrong choices. But at any rate, That was a good choice. It was a suggestion, and I listened and I went. Now, my life didn't completely change at that point, but it opened the door. Again, I want to stress God gives us opportunities to open new doors. And I think that everything in our life, if we look at it from at least a clearer perspective, we can see it as a door opening to a better perspective. So I went to Al Anon for a while. Not much else in my life changed. And then I ended up in couples counseling. And couples counseling, the counselor had said to me, had invited me to tell the group a little bit about myself. And that's primarily because the partner that was supposed to be at those counseling sessions with me never showed up, not once in 6 weeks. And so I began to tell her a little bit about me. And she interrupts me and says, "You know, Karen, I think what you need is AA." And I was dumbstruck. I went to AA that following week, and it was simply the same as that first Al Anon meeting. I walked in and I felt this sense of well being. I walked in with no intention of not ever having another drink. I never, ever, ever had the desire to have another drink following that night. Again, it was really God coming to my aid. You know, I think that if we take the time, any of us, to look back on our lives, we'll see all the times that God was nudging another door open for us that we wouldn't even had any awareness of. We wouldn't have known to walk through. But that's exactly what happened for me. I walked through that door, and that was the beginning of a huge change in my life. Now, remember, I was still in graduate school at this point in time, and now I was sober. Unfortunately, my troubles with my mental health issues were not resolved yet. And after I was sober about 18 months, I very seriously sat down to take my own life. I had it all planned out. I was going to turn on the gas. I had all my towels rolled up to tuck around the window so I could turn on the gas. And there was a knock at the door. And I was utterly dumbfounded because nobody was coming that I knew of. I hadn't been out of my house for over a week. I hadn't gone to teach any of my classes. I hadn't gone to any classes because, remember, I was still a student. And I went to the door because she kept pounding. And I said, "Who is it?" And she said, "Pat." And she said, "We have an appointment." And I opened the door, and she opened her little planner. This is how long ago it was, when we still had daily planners. And she showed me my name was right there in her planner. And she said, "We have an appointment to talk about your finances." Well, finances. I had no money. I was living in $100 a month apartment in graduate school, getting paid very little while I was teaching at the university. Anyway, she looked at me and said, "Is there something the matter?" And I said, "I'm depressed." This was the total shift in my perception that I would never have imagined occurring. She began to explain to me what was happening. And she said, "You know, you are on the precipice of a new spiritual awakening. And God is across this abyss that you feel is there, waiting to take your hand. And you are going to be just fine. Just reach for that hand." And I heard her, and I knew what she said was right. I knew she was speaking truth. This woman named Pat, who I had never laid eyes on before, who had come knocking on my door to talk to me about finances, even though I had no money. And at that point, she got up and she said, "Our business is done." And she walked to the door and I followed her. And she turned and put her arms around me and said, Karen, I want you to know that you're going to be just fine. And she left. I never saw her again, of course. And to this day, I know that she was an angel who had been sent to safeguard me, an angel who had been sent to send me on a new journey, a new path. And nothing in my life remained the same. Did I ever get depressed again? Yes. But I knew from that moment on that God had never abandoned me, that always God was there. And so I have come to believe that what we really are here in this life to do is to share with others whatever we can about making one another's lives better. And so I have spent, as Sherry mentioned to you, I ended up writing my first book for women in AA, for women in 12-step recovery. Each day, a new beginning. Some of you may be familiar with that book. But, I honestly had no idea that what was going to happen in my life is what has happened. I never, ever thought that I would be doing workshops. I never, ever thought that I would be writing books on topics that would maybe help people get over those bumps in the road. And that is, in fact, what God has called me to do. And all I had to do was say yes. And what I also believe is that all of that had been destined for me. All of that had been part of the plan from the beginning. I look back on my earlier life. I grew up not in an alcoholic family, but I grew up with a very raging father. And so I look back at all of that anxiety. I look back at that first drink. I look back at growing up in a family where we tiptoed around each other because everybody was so afraid of the eruption of anger. I look back at all of my poor choices as far as relationships were concerned, because I was always looking for somebody to tell me I was okay, because that isn't how I felt in the family I grew up in. And all of that was part of the master plan, I think. Now, some of you may think that that seems pretty far-fetched, but it brings me great calm to think that there is a master plan for our lives. And so all of the books that I have continued to write, some of them specific for recovery, some of them specific to living in our relationships more peacefully, but all of them really dovetail in how can my life be better? Because it's not just about my life. It's not just about your life, but it's about how our lives impact others. And I really think that every action any one of us takes has a direct impact on another person. And it's not an accidental impact. And what I'm going to do now is share a screen of with some points that I have, that I outline for you, that I won't get through all of them. I'm sure it's already 8:08. But what Jennifer is going to do, let me share this screen. There it is. Oh, I did. Wait a minute. I don't think that's right. Let me try that again. There. Boy, I tell you, this is not easy. I really didn't want all of this on the right-hand side there either, but I don't know how to get rid of it. Remember, I'm 81. You can only do a certain number of things at my age. So anyway, what I really want to talk for the rest of the time about, and what I hope your questions are about, are the things that I want to bring up here, because the title of the rest of this talk, and actually this talk could go on for a half a day if we had the time, but it's about becoming our better selves, one thought, one act at a time. And I'm not going to talk about all of these points, but I have highlighted in red some of them that I want to hit on specifically. And so I'll make a few comments about them. But any one of these could be worthy of you taking some time to ponder, taking some time to journal about, taking some time to sit with a friend about, and go over these, because I look at these are ideas that I've really fleshed out in any number of the books that I have written. And so there's a lot of depth to them, but there's not time to talk about all of that here. But let me look at number 2, which is one of the first ones. We all know that we ask God for help. So I don't really need to talk about that. You do that all the time, I'm sure, or you wouldn't be part of this particular group of people. And we can't do our lives very easily without asking God for help. But be kind regardless of the circumstances we share with others. You know, I have come to believe that Mother Teresa, who said so many years ago, be kind to everyone, start with the person standing next to you, that was probably one of the wisest things that she ever said and that I ever heard from anybody. Because if we show up being our kind, better self, what we will always do is bring ourselves into communion with another person. And that will always be have a healing impact. And I think that is what, and of course, right now, since we're all living with COVID and we're all living separated lives, because we can't gather into that kind of communion, but we can still, I think, be kind in all kinds of circumstances. I don't know about you, but I put on my mask and go to the grocery, and I have an opportunity every time to be kind to any number of people that I see there. I can be kind to any person I talk to on the telephone. I can be kind to my husband. You know, and it's kindness is we can be kind to everybody that we're on a Zoom gathering with. You know, it's really about acknowledging, honoring one another. Next, becoming aware that fear is at the root of all hostility. And that is probably one of the most important things that I learned a number of years ago from A Course in Miracles. I am a student of A Course in Miracles and have been for about 30 years. And one of the first things I learned in the Course in Miracles is that everything is either coming from a place of love or a place of fear. If I can remember that that's anybody I'm with, or anybody who is present wherever I am or on the phone, I mean, all of these, some adjustments are necessary since we are now living at a distance from each other. But if I can remember that any hostility from anybody, any hostility we see on television is really rooted in that person's fear. And it's my opportunity to respond to it from a place of love. You know, that if everything is either an expression of fear or an expression of love, then the opportunity to always be a healer and function from a place of love is really God's invitation to me and to you and to all of us. I believe that everyone on your path, everyone on my path, known or a total stranger, is a messenger and an opportunity. And you know, some of you are familiar probably with the book Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Mace. And it's a book that she wrote a number of years ago. but it was a book that had a real impact on me, because in that she said that as souls, before we are born here, we actually determine what it is we want to learn from one another, and we will meet in this life. And I love that because it helped to explain to me a lot of the um, a lot of the experiences I had, like the experience of sexual abuse that I had as a 12-year-old, with a distant kind of family member, actually. It helped me to realize that that experience happened to me because of my opportunity to learn how to forgive. And that was, it took away the onus of what had happened when I realized, according to her, that it really was a sacred encounter because of how it brought me to the whole idea of forgiveness. So everyone on our path, known or unknown, is an opportunity for us to grow. Everyone. Remember the question, am I helping or hindering my relationships today before speaking? That's probably something that would change everything in our lives if we remembered to think about that. Is what I'm about to say kind? Is what I'm about to say going to be advantageous to the situation? Is what I'm about to say going to be show a better side of myself and allow this other person to feel good about him or herself? And when in doubt about that, number 10, take a deep breath and say nothing. When in conflict, make an immediate mental note of something you are grateful about regarding your adversary. I think that we all find ourselves in conflict, and maybe right now, because of the struggle that we're all having in this quarantined existence, some of us maybe find ourselves in conflict oftener than used to be the case. But I think that to think about all the things we have to be grateful for with that person in particular. My husband, my dog, and I are the only ones in this house. And I have so many things that I'm grateful for. And every time that I am about to think of something and start a conflict, I promise you it has helped me to just stop and just count my blessings. Taking the road to peace, some principles for getting there. If you are focused, and this comes right back to that codependency, if you are focused on someone else, you are not living wisely. And as I said, my whole life, I was always looking at you to see if I could decipher what you were thinking about me, because then I would know whether I could feel okay or not. That's one of the beauties of the whole idea of detachment, which is so crucial to what we learn in Al-Anon. Al-Anon, I'm considered a double winner, which means I've stayed consistent with Al-Anon, and I've stayed consistent with AA since I went to my first Al-Anon meeting in 1974, and I've been in AA since May of 1976. And I tell you, those have been absolutely crucial to my learning how to be my better self in this life. And that particular one, taking the road to peace, if I'm focused on someone else, then I'm not making a very good choice. Because if our focus is always on somebody else, that means we are really wanting to control them. And we're not in this life to control somebody else. We're in this life to honor one another. We're in this life to walk side by side with one another, to celebrate one another. But that doesn't mean I need to be or should be focused on you all the time. If you're holding a resentment against anyone, you're not living wisely. You know, the resentments we hold against people prevent us completely from feeling any of that love that God wants so desperately from us. You know, our assignment in this life, I think, if we can boil it down to something very simple, our assignment in this life, I think, is to be acts of love, to walk peacefully, and to live with the willingness to forgive others, forgive others for everything that they do. And that ties right in. I'm not going to go through all of these, but that ties right in with number 6 here. Remember, there is no struggle too big to relinquish. You know, sometimes we just are so convinced that we are right. We'd rather be right than happy. That is just the wrong avenue to take. You know what if we can choose instead to make the kind choice, if we could choose instead to make the gentle response, if we can choose instead to honor people in the right way, look what we are doing to benefit all of humanity. It's not just that particular situation. And, you know, when you think about the mental health of humanity, we all have a job we could do to improve the mental health of all of humanity. Look down now at number 11 in this list, because I had mentioned detachment a moment ago, because detachment is something that we focus a lot on in Al-Anon. Detachment is not indifference. When I was first introduced to the idea of detachment, I actually thought detachment meant you just like shunned somebody, you walked away from them, you just pushed them aside. And that's absolutely almost the reverse of detachment. Is an act of love. And I want to make that point loud and clear. Detachment is an act of love, because it is saying to the other person, I honor you enough, I care about you enough to let you make your own choices, to let you live your own life. And it's the way we can both travel a peaceful path. As long as I dance around you or expect you to dance around me, we will be caught in this dance of confusion, and neither of us will be walking a peaceful path. So this next one too, try being the first one to back away from a conflict. How hard is that? How hard is that? And this can tie in with detachment too. How hard is that really to say, is this really, it's like be the first to walk away, to relinquish a struggle. How hard is that to say, you know, I don't really want to be a party to this. And that doesn't mean we stomp off. That means we can just turn away and say, this isn't what I want to commit myself to. This next one, number 15, there are 2 kinds of business. And I love this: my business and none of my business. And, you know, a good friend of mine from one of my Al-Anon groups down here in Naples, he was the first person I heard say that a number of years ago. And I have treasured it ever since, because how many times a day do you find yourself getting involved in somebody else's business? And when we think of the title of this talk, Being Our Better Selves, that's never going to promote being our better selves. If we will never, ever be our better selves if we are involved in somebody else's business. And, you know, I mean, we're here to appreciate each other. We're here to realize that one another is on our path intentionally. We intersect intentionally because of all the lessons Each of us is here to learn, but does not mean at all that what we're supposed to do is get involved in each other's business. What guarantees a peaceful journey? I think that this first one that I list here, making a difference in someone else's life, guarantees a peaceful journey. You know, one of the things that I have loved, and I think they've been doing it for quite a while, but on NBC, at the end of their show, at their evening news, at the end of their show, they always have one of those sweet stories about something nice that somebody has done, some caring thing that somebody has done. And you know, I think that we can all make a difference in someone else's life in such a simple way. You know, all you have to do is maybe make a telephone call or write an email or drop a card to each other, or at the grocery store, nod to somebody, whether you know them or not. You know, I think that people feel so invisible, and particularly during the quarantine, I think it's so easy for people to feel invisible to one another. So I think one of the kindest things we can do is to let a perfect stranger know that she or he isn't invisible to you, that in fact you see them. And maybe they won't respond back, but I assure you that they will hear you when you say hello. How are you? And I think that that is doing a great service for both of you. Number 4, replace a negative thought with a fond memory. A friend of mine who teaches classes to corporations shared that with me. It's from Heart Math, which is a training program that some of you maybe have heard from before. But it was one of the things that they always told people to do when they had negative thoughts about some of their fellow colleagues. They might not have a fond memory with that colleague in particular, but replace that negative thought with a fond memory of some kind so that you change that chemistry in your brain in that moment. Because it really is about changing brain chemistry. You know, mental health issues are so often tied to brain chemistry. And, you know, many of us have needed, because of our mental health issues, we have needed medication for that brain chemistry. And I'm not embarrassed to say that I have been on medication since the 90s for depression and anxiety. And perhaps if I had been on that before, I wouldn't have become so close to taking my life when God had to send in Pat. But I think everything happened perfectly anyway, as it needed to. I love number 7, and I point this out because I love being reminded myself that God does not need our awareness of him to make him a real presence on our journey. I love knowing that God is so big. God doesn't need me to even think of God, to think of him, for him to think of me. I mean, I think that God and I are one. I think that all of you and I are one. I think that we all share this oneness with God. And God, I don't think needs us to, I think it's good. It makes me feel good to have an awareness of God, but God does not rely on my awareness of him for him to be present in my life anyway. And number 11, do only what would please God, and everything else will fall away. I'm looking at the time, it's 8:29, so I'm only going to make comment about one more. Number 14. Oh no, number 19, make the choice to do no harm. the universe will benefit. And I'm going to, the reason I wanted to talk about that one is because I heard a story by the Dalai Lama many, many, many years ago. And it's a wonderful story, and it's a great story to close on. And the Dalai Lama had been invited to speak to a gathering in California, and it was a big dinner. And he was the main speaker following the dinner. And it was a fundraiser of some kind. I don't know. I might have known at one kind what it was, but that's not even relevant. But you all know what the Dalai Lama looks like, and we all know that he's not a very big man. He came out to the podium and got up on his little stool so everybody could see him. And he looked out at this large crowd of people who are sitting at tables after having just finished probably a very mediocre meal of chicken, which is what we often get at those kinds of gatherings. And he said, your assignment in this life is to love one another. And with that, he just stopped. That's all he said. And he got off his pedestal or the stool, walked off, and people in the audience were just dumbfounded. Like, my gosh, here we are. We've spent all this money for terrible food. We expected at least a half-hour talk from the Dalai Lama. And so there was just kind of not uproar, but you could tell that there were a lot of upset people. And then he walked back out. And so people kind of sat back in their seats again, relieved that that was just a little teaser. And now he was going to tell them, give the real talk. And he stood there and he said, and if you can't love one another, at least don't hurt one another. And with that, he stepped back down and walked off and didn't return. And I think that when we think about being our better selves, there is no better thing we can do than make the decision every day that we will do nothing that would harm somebody else, that we are not going to hurt anybody by mean, unnecessary words, that we will be gentle in how we approach people, that we will be kind, as Mother Teresa said, starting with the person standing next to us, that life isn't that difficult. Life is pretty easy. We make it difficult because we're so focused on ourselves. But I think becoming our better selves means focusing on how we can love others better. And I hope that the points that I've tried to make give you some ideas for yourself. And it's not that difficult. And we are so lucky to be alive in this day and age, to have at our access something like Zoom to get us through a period like the quarantine. Because, here we are. And, even though we're not sitting next to each other, here we are. And tomorrow we will cross paths some way, someplace, either in a phone call or a neighbor on the street or at the grocery. And all we have to do is show up as our better self. And to finally close, I would like to invite you, if you're interested, you can go to my website. And actually, I better screen share that again. At the very bottom, there is my website, www.womens-spirituality.com. and that lists all of my books. I do Facebook posts pretty often, and you just can go to search Karen Casey on Facebook, and there I will be. And any of the books that you might be interested in that you see on my website, everything is available at Amazon. So if we had done it in person as we had originally planned, I was going to be selling books there tonight. But if you have any interest at all, they are still available to you. And I simply want to thank all of you. I couldn't see any of you, but I know you're out there. And so I want to thank all of you for taking the time to take advantage of this. And I wish you all good health. Thank you.
First of all,
So
Karen,
so at this time, we're going to do questions and answers. So if you could put your question in the question and answer box, and Karen will answer the questions. Our first question we might have already had resolved was about getting the list emailed out to the people that have attended tonight's thing. So that was one of the things.
Let me say too that no question is off the table. You can ask anything you want. I mean anything.
I will mention that I will email that list that she presented to the Mental Health Monday group. So if you're eager to get your hands on that list of statements, I'll be emailing it out to all of you.
So this is also not a regular Zoom meeting, so you won't be able to see the other participants, just the panelists. So our one question was about being able to see everybody that is in attendance here, and that's not an option for this type of program that we're doing. So let's see what the next question is here.
I see quite a few have written on chat. Did some of the people maybe put questions in the chat column rather than under Q&A?
I'm not seeing any questions yet. So we do have one person on the phone, and I don't know how to get a question from them. But here's another question. Let's see. Oh, no.
Karen, this is Ann. Could you speak a little bit more about the concept of a master plan or this predestination? Because I'm imagining that may make other people uncomfortable as it does myself.
Okay. Well, you know, I just have felt from my own experiences, I have grown, it brings me great comfort to think that there has been purpose in all of the experiences I've had in my life. And I really look at my life as this tapestry of threads, and every thread is an experience that I had, and all of those have been woven together to become who I am today, and it is still being woven. And so I really, it's my feeling that that nothing happens accidentally, that even something that maybe looks dire and is uncomfortable to us is really a way for us to move in a new direction. There were lots of things that happened to me, like my divorce. I mean, that was the last thing I wanted to have happen, in spite of the fact that that he was a very unfaithful partner, and it was a very alcoholic, unhealthy marriage. But I looked in retrospect at that and felt like that was really what opened the door for me to then move into graduate school, that it played a key role, that had those things not happened, I wouldn't have ended up in Minneapolis. I wouldn't have ultimately ended up going into graduate school. And it was in graduate school that I discovered the love of writing. And so the beauty of that was that I look at all of that as absolutely perfect, incremental activities that needed to happen for me to end up here where I am today. So it brings me comfort, and maybe it doesn't bring everybody else comfort, but it has eliminated fear for me if I think that whatever happens is really the next right thing on my calendar of happenings. You know, when I commented about the sexual abuse when I was like 11 or 12, and it wasn't, I don't want to indicate in any way that there was anything pleasant about that, and it was an awful kind of thing, and it shouldn't have happened. But when I dealt with that in therapy afterwards, and it was suggested to me that I sit down and write a letter to this person, telling him how I felt about it, I did, and I got some relief. But here was the interesting part, you guys. I was really called to sit down at my computer a few days later. I didn't know. I mean, I was so used to, at that point, sitting and writing and being called to write. I never, ever have known what I was going to sit and write. I mean, I've always just sat, and it just felt that the words that needed to be said came out. I sat down and found myself saying, "Dear Karen," and he was writing a letter to me. And it was almost like automatic writing. And he was telling me how about his life and how very sorry he was. And I ended up walking away from that. I can remember at the time I printed it out and took it down and showed it to my husband. And it was as though it all had been forgiven. I was able to look at all of that from an entirely different perspective. So I think that was the thing in my life that taught me more about forgiveness than any other experience I ever had, prior or even since. So that's what I mean when I think that everything that happens is playing its perfect part in who we are becoming in this life. I don't know if that helps you at all, Anne, or gives you any sense of relief, but for me, it just seems that it just seems to fit for my life.
That helps. Thanks.
So we have another question. What do you think God is trying to teach us during this COVID times, and what have you learned during this time?
Well, you know what I have learned. What I have personally learned is the joy of slowing down. I've learned the joy of just being more appreciative of the quiet, of really just being here with my husband and my yellow lab Nellie, and knowing that you know, we have this time together unlike any other time. I'm not running off any place. You know, I've always been a very, very busy person, always on the go. You know, I've traveled a lot doing workshops, and, you know, and I go to lots of meetings, and I still do on Zoom. But I feel as though this has given our planet a time to rest. I feel like it has given everybody a chance to kind of take stock of who have I been all this time? And do I really want to keep doing all those things that I used to do? Or might I try something different? And, for me too, because at the beginning of it, it wasn't the quarantine so much that I was feeling depressed about, but I just didn't, I felt at the beginning of it disappointed that we couldn't go north because I was so used to that. I have all kinds of friends in Minneapolis that I'm so used to getting together with and playing bridge with in the summer. And it was like, oh, poor me. But then I don't know. I when I was feeling a lot of those feelings, I sat down and started to write. And I went to Facebook initially, and I wrote for like 50 or 60 days straight. I wrote every single day on Facebook, and just about things I was feeling, about things I was seeing, observations. And what it did for me was help me to get back in touch of the value of writing for me, because the last book I had written was 20 Things I Know for Sure. And so it had been a few months since I had sat to write. And for me, writing is really central to my life. It is how God communicates with me. Each Day a New Beginning, that first book, I didn't set out to write a book that would be read by 3.5 million other people, I assure you. All I was trying to do was connect with God. I would go to AA and love it, and I would go home and sit by myself and feel absolutely disconnected and lost. And so I had discovered in graduate school that I loved writing papers, but that wasn't quite the same. It wasn't the same feeling. I sat down and started talking to God and listening to God. And that's what became that very first book, Each Day a New Beginning. And so it has become for me ever since then, I'm drawn to writing because that's when I know that God and I are present to each other. And so in the quarantine, when I was started doing Facebook posts and feeling kind of at a loss, I thought, maybe it's time to start another book. And so I did. So I started writing, and now I hadn't written a daily meditation book for quite a while. And so I started another daily meditation book, and it has been absolutely, it has been such a gift to me to sit every day and visit with God. So I don't any longer remember what the question was. So that's 81. So I don't know if I answered, but I remember what has the quarantine taught me? The quarantine has taught me to slow down and listen to God. And it has given me the opportunity to just be more quietly focused. And I really look around and think our earth desperately needs to be taken care of better. And maybe in this whole time, we can all think more carefully about that.
We have somebody who, one of our viewers wants to thank you for your helpful words and for sharing your story. And they're an Al-Anon devotee also. And they've been reading a lot about Buddhism, and they have found great consistency with the principles you've shared. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I'm not a practicing Buddhist, but I know that other people have suggested that my writing reminds them of that. And I think that part of that too is because a lot of my writing comes right out of A Course in Miracles. And Buddhism and Course in Miracles are parallel, I think, in many respects. So I think finally it comes down to the kind of writing, the search for peace in our lives. And whether we're doing that according to a Buddhist path or whether we're doing that, whatever pathway we're choosing, if we're on the search for greater peace in our lives, I think that means we're really going to show up in one another's lives in a much better way. You know, this country of ours, this world of ours, really needs examples of peace. And you know, one of the points that I made to you about, I think was one of the points that I made about, would you rather be peaceful or right? You know, I think that if for us to show our peaceful side, excuse me, to one another, excuse me, is doing greater good for our planet, as well as those individual relationships, than anything else we can do. I firmly believe in the butterfly effect, that whatever we do with one person is felt on the other side of the planet. So I think that whenever we show up in a loving way, one place, it is felt far, far away. So I think that our job isn't just to be, excuse me. This is part of what happens to me with talking too much and that lung disease that I have. I think that our job is to show up in all of our encounters as loving and kind as we can. Because I think anything we do in the moment is adding benefit throughout the universe. I think that anything we do in the moment is lifting that vibrational level throughout the universe. And I want to be part of that. I want to be one of those people who helps to lift that vibration. And I think that it doesn't take much for us to do that.
And Karen, thank you, thank you, thank you. Loving thoughts and kindness to you. This has been greatly appreciated. Your words are kind and meaningful and words to live by. We're very appreciative of your time and being here tonight. And I want to thank all those of you who attended tonight, and we are glad that you were here. I hope that you'll tune in next week, or next month, sorry, to the second Monday of October, where we'll be hearing from Dr. Dawn Taylor, who is a director at Melrose Center for Eating Disorders. And she will be talking about the broad scope of eating disorders. She has been doing national speaking and has become an expert in the area of eating disorders. If you need CEUs for this presentation tonight, you can email me at dwarvik, W-A-A-R, V as in Victor, I-K, church.org, and I will be sure you get your certificate. So again, thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it.
Good night.
Night.
Good night. Thanks.